Good evening. It's 94.1 FM, Egypt, Australia radio show is with myself, Jerry Guirguis, interviewing Dr. Raymond Shuey, APM, and Tania, Maxwell, MP. This is a pre-recording via Zoom session on Thursday, the 9th of December 2021, and it will be broadcast on Sunday, the 12th of December. What should we do with repeat domestic and sexual offenders, especially in case where the perpetrators are known to be violent enough to go back and finish the job, killing the victim? Please welcome with us tonight Dr. Raymond Shuey, APM, Vietnam veteran, former Assistant Police, Victorian Police Commissioner, 42 years of police career service, International Road Safety Specialist, President, International Safety Foundation, 2020, the year 2020, Senior Victorian Australian of the Year, and also an Advocacy, Community Advocacy Alliance. Also with us, and thank you very much for attending, Tania Maxwell, MP, Derryn, Hinch's Justice Party, member for the Northern Victoria, a member of the Legislative Council, Legal and Social Issue Committee. Tania moved successfully in Parliament to establish the most significant inquiry into Victoria's criminal justice system in the last 30 years. Also encouraged the government to revamp assistance for victims of crime. Also to review of the way in which courts consider coercive control to ensure that offenders' behaviour patterns can be taken into account in sentencing. Hi and welcome to you both. Thank you for coming and attending the 94.1 FM radio.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for having us.
Can I please start with you, Ray? Tell us the background on your Royal Commission, the Royal Commission of 2015.
Thanks, Jerry. Well, as most people would appreciate, we had a Royal Commission here into family violence, and that came forward with 227 recommendations. Most of those recommendations have now been put into place. Unfortunately, the offender violence continues, and it causes us some real concern in the Community Advocacy Alliance. As we know, at this particular point in time, the domestic violence is increasing and not decreasing. And from Victoria Police, we know that every 7 minutes, police attend a family violence incident of some type. We know that 28% of homicides during 2019, 2020 resulted in family violence deaths, and that was 19 deaths for the year. There's about 92,000 family violence incidents in Victoria in 2020, and the cost is huge to the government and to the various organisations, and notwithstanding the trauma to the families. So we see that it's a multi-million-dollar industry across Victoria. We've got a minister, a department, an assistant commissioner of police, and we have thousands and thousands of workers involved in various forms trying to do something about it. And what we hear from the victims is they just want the violence to stop. And time again, we hear stories that this must never happen again, and yet it does, often with tragic outcomes. So we have a team that's working on this to try and identify the key issues, and what our focus is really is to change the focus to offender accountability, to make offenders accountable. We have strong victim support units across Victoria, but the critical issue from our perspective is offender accountability, to hold each offender to account and to address those high-risk situations.
Ray, I'll come back to some of the stats that you got the listeners an opportunity to listen to the $2.7 billion project allocated by the state of Victoria, and yet your remarks were that the offences levels are still going up.
Yes, that's correct. And it's going up from the ordinary, or I suppose the low-level situations where we have domestic violence situations, just with partner arguments and things like that, through to critical assaults and the serious situations of tragedy and homicides and murder. So this is what we're really focused on, to try and minimise those issues and help the victims. We hear of many stories where the victim is in hiding and they've got a panic button that they've got to press if they're in trouble, and the offenders are out roaming at large in the community.
Can I ask Tania if you can come in now? Most significant inquiry into Victoria's criminal justice system in the 30 years. Just tell us about that.
Jerry, thank you, and welcome to all your listeners, and to Raymond. Look, I'll give you a little bit of background behind what drove me to make the referral. Obviously, it had to be supported within the Legislative Council to do the referral to the Legal and Social Issues Committee. But just to give you a bit of background history, I was actually in Queensland when a young boy, Daniel Morecambe, and it was 18 years ago when I was living in Queensland, and he was kidnapped. And it took many, many years to be able to find what happened to little Daniel. He was a young boy, he was kidnapped, he was off to the shops. I think he was doing the right thing, going to buy some Christmas presents for his family, and very sadly, he never returned. And that little boy was the catalyst to the work that I do now. So knowing that we have these offenders out there living amongst us, that's what drove me to decide that we needed to have not only an inquiry into our justice system, but we also needed to allow victims to have a voice, because in order for us to make change, and particularly when we're talking about sexual offences and family violence offenders, I think it's absolutely pivotal that victims have a voice in this, because how do we make change without understanding what a victim needs? And we need to be learning about the preventative measures that could be taken in order to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. So look, I'm very excited to have the inquiry. We are due to complete the inquiry and deliberate on the report, which is due, I believe, on around the 23rd of February. So we have completed all the hearings at the moment. So I think we had around 160 submissions, which has been across a very broad spectrum. We've had so many organisations and stakeholders, but my main point was to try and get victims to the table, because for me, they are the ones that experience the absolute of what the justice system brings, and the inadequacies, the gaps. They are the people who can tell the true story in this. You know, organisations who work with offenders bring another set of circumstances and concerns, but for me, it was really important to bring that voice for the victims.
You also got another story as well as for Daniel. Daniel was a Queensland case.
Yes.
Di McDonald's is a Victorian case. Is that the case? Is that the...
Yes, absolutely. And look, when I first met Di, I could hardly believe her story. It was so frightening. It was so abhorrent how the justice system had let her down. And you know, she lost a very near and dear friend who took her own life because of the stalking that was actually happening. And I still don't understand how somebody can go through that process, and the interventions to hold that person accountable are almost non-existent. And as Raymond was saying, we need to be holding these offenders accountable. And in Di's situation, she's still having to manage her safety every day. You know, he's been incarcerated, but the real issue is, I think it's heightened, is when they're released. Because the incarceration not only holds them accountable for the crimes that they may have committed, but it also allows them time to sit within that, the incarceration, within the prison, and their anger and frustration towards the victim who has actually put them there, it is very unpredictable. And I don't believe that we have enough services to monitor that upon release, which leads us into that very discussion of electronic monitoring.
There's a couple of points, resentment and gratitude, and people talk quite a bit about the work within the services on resentment and gratitude, but that's another time. I just wanted to make reference to, as early as a week ago up in the Northern Territory, and as recent as December 2021 in Northern Territory, a mother texts her daughter and she says, "Your dad is going to come and kill me." And that's what's happened. And this is going back, Tania, on what you're saying, in that this build-up, the perpetrator builds in their mind, him or her mind, while being away in prison or whatever, under custody. And then the elements that transpires into action. And I go back to the beginning and we say, violent enough to go back and finish the job.
And Jerry, you raise a really good point there, and I don't think family violence is a standalone offence. I'm not sure whether you are aware, and Raymond, you possibly won't be, but I recently put forward a motion and had victims come to Parliament with me to talk about coercive control, and that plays an enormous part in the outcome of family violence. We look at Hannah Clark and her children who were so tragically killed by her partner, and coercive control is something that Queensland are now looking at as an offence. I also think that we have to look at the primary prevention and early intervention. We have to know, learn and understand the behaviours of these offenders, and we have to be able to cut that off and change their behaviours in whatever way we can. So there's an enormous amount of learnings, and I don't believe that just throwing money into a family violence organisation is actually the most appropriate way to be doing this. I think that we have to have more accountability for offenders. We have to rely on not only change behavioural programs, because they don't work for everybody. And for some people, they respond better to a one-on-one approach. Some people like that group approach. But we have to adapt what we're doing. We have to adapt the programs to best suit those who are perpetrating these offences, because ultimately we want the offending to stop. That is what is going to save our mothers, our parents, our children from experiencing these horrendous crimes, is stopping the behaviour. And how do we do that? And I know that there was a report out today looking at adolescent violence, and that's something that I've been very vocal about for many, many years, saying if we do not start addressing adolescent family violence that is being perpetrated in the home, we are going to see an entirely new generation of adults who are going to be inflicting this violence against their loved ones.
Very valid point. And I think that's one of the... Sorry, live radio. The one thing that I wanted to go back to, and recently there's been lots of radio and TV campaign on the adolescent violence, and I think that that strikes a chord in lots and lots of ways. We had it many years ago on, if we're seeing what the parents do, the kids will simulate in that, the drinking, the smoking, the blah, blah, blah. And very, very valid point. And I think that is one thing that we have to address. We have to help the younger generation. Tania, you can talk heaps on that. And I think Ray would agree on the fact that with the driving, we're talking about roads and accidents, there was a lot of mindset that was talked about in educating the learners coming on the road. And so the education is a huge component that we need to put to the public.
Thank you. It really has to be a holistic approach to whatever way you deal with it. So it's not just a one-stop shop that's going to fix anything. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to address a suite of issues rather than just one single aspect. And just coming back to what you're talking about before with the offender violence there, we've got a situation currently in a complaint lodged with us about an offender that's going to be released from jail, early release next month. Now, mum and the kids have got to up stumps and actually transfer and go into hiding again. They were relatively secure, and now the kids have got to change school and all this sort of disruption to the family. And they were only notified a couple of days ago that the early release was going to happen. So, and it's not even time to just change your rental positions or whatever. It's just the system doesn't work in coordination to assist the victims. So anyway, that's another aspect of it. And this is why we're firmly of the belief that things such as ankle bracelets and tracking devices on the offenders should be mandatory for high-risk offenders.
Ray, if I can just pick on that one element on that story, you know, the question just that sets red flags in my head, do we know the profile of the perpetrator? Are they of a violent nature?
Yes, of course, and that's why they're in there in the first place. And the tragedy of this family is that they've appealed to government and they've taken other actions to try and do something about it. And then they come to the Community Advocacy Alliance to see if we can do something about it. And it's the whole regime of the parole system and early releases because of the pandemic and not considering the victims in this situation. So what do? It's got to be a rush job to try and hide them. And then the offender gets out and as Tania said, they've got this pent up vengeance that they're going to get back at the victim because that's the reason they're in there in the first place. So.
Ray, can I go to a good story out of Tasmania? They've implemented what you've just mentioned before, an ankle bracelet. Tell us about that there, please, Ray.
Thank you. Tasmania is a really good story, both in terms of the coercive control legislation, which they've had for many, many years. And recently they've undertaken trials with the ankle bracelets, the tracking devices, and they've found that they're very successful. So what they did was a 20-month trial over in Tasmania during the last action reform program 2015 to 2020. And they came up with the evaluation that there's increased safety for the women and children. There's a decrease in the number and severity of incidents, and particularly they've got an increase in the breaches because with the tracking devices, the stalking that was mentioned by Tania before, there are issues that you can automatically pick up really before
Ray, I think we've lost you.
Yeah, we're losing you.
Okay.
If I can just get Ray to hold for a few seconds. Just looking at the time, and I promised everyone that we won't be going over the 30 minutes. So, Tania, can I know we've got a balanced life and work. Tania, very quickly, please. Can I, Tasmania, we heard from Ray that, great success story. Why not Victoria? As simply as that. I mean, you're in a position to do more.
And that's a great question, Jerry. And look, this is something that I addressed a few years ago with a former Assistant Commissioner, Dean McWhirter in Victoria. And I went to him and said, why are we not utilising ankle bracelets? Now, bear in mind that we had somebody on parole, a sex offender on parole in Wangaratta. He kidnapped his neighbour. He tortured her. It was the most horrific, violent attack. Now, if he had been able to have his ankle bracelet on longer, that could have perhaps saved her. Why not Victoria? One thing that Dean McWhirter put forward was he felt that it lulled people into a false sense of security. My argument to that would be the cost of incarcerating a victim, an offender, sorry, the cost of the counselling for that entire family or that victim alone can be years and years of needing to see a psychologist, medical appointments, etc. It is far cheaper. It is far more, sorry, so I've just been distracted. It is far more economic and beneficial to the safety of the community. And let's remember that the victims here must be the centre point for safety. Their priorities must override that of an offender and of a perpetrator who is perpetrating this violent offending. We need to ensure that it doesn't become down to dollars and cents. So I would strongly lobby the Victoria Police on that and challenge them on, this is about keeping people safe. This isn't about dollars and cents. And the full breadth of that would be that dollars and cents should not come into this. And I still think it would be far cheaper to have electronic monitoring on an offender. And we need to, as Ray said before, this is a holistic approach. This isn't a one size fits all, and it's not a siloed approach. You don't just have an electronic monitor put on you and then that's it. Oh, everybody's safe. There needs to be criteria that the perpetrator has to then meet. So they should have to be either addressing their drug and alcohol issues. There's a plethora of issues and trauma that may be involved in why that person is offending. And unless you delve into what is causing that offending behaviour, then it won't cease.
Ray, what is it that we need to say or demonstrate or evidence-based data from Tasmania and other states to implement the ankle bracelet to the police, Victorian Police, and implement it?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's not only the Victoria Police, it's the Victorian Government, because the actual tracking is undertaken by a different organisation. So it's a whole of government approach that's relevant. But the Tasmanian example just showed that the offender is 100% accountable for their actions. So it's not just about watching and monitoring. The offenders, these are the high-risk offenders that really should be in jail. If you're going to release them, then you've got to take a next safety step, and that's the ankle monitors. But importantly, what it showed in Tassie was that it's a constant reminder and to the offender, and it gives them a clear opportunity to change their behaviour. They know that they're under surveillance, so they have the opportunity then to change their behaviour. And some of the offenders, when interviewed, said that they realised this and actually changed their behaviour. Rather than being a controller, they were actually being controlled by a government agency. So these are the critical issues, and it picks up the stalking and it assists.
Okay, I've been given the wind up by our application. I sincerely want to thank you both for allocating your time tonight, and I really look forward to moving this in Victoria.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you for the opportunity.